The taxi pulled away, leaving me with the late afternoon sun pooling over the walkway where my roses once bloomed. My hip ached as I adjusted my cane, but the ache was nothing compared to the rush of anticipation. 31 days of hospital food, antiseptic air, and endless rounds of vitals. I was finally back where I belonged. The house stood before me, pale stucco and dark shutters, just as Anthony and I had restored it 3 decades ago. I inhaled, expecting the familiar scent of gardenias drifting from the porch. Instead, a faint trace of fresh paint and cigarette smoke met me. My chest tightened. I lifted the spare key from my purse, the one I had used for years. The lock resisted. I twisted harder, only to find the metal grinding against something foreign. Someone had changed it. "Excuse me?" a voice called. The door swung open, but it wasn't Marissa. A tall man with a broad chest and silver chain around his neck stared back at me as though I were a stranger on his property. Behind him, I caught sight of a woman arranging boxes in the foyer. Neither face belonged to my family. "This is my house," I said more to myself than to him. "Who are you?" the man smirked. "Name's Reuben Clark. My wife and I moved in last week. Marissa said you'd understand." Blood roared in my ears. My only daughter's name, spoken by a man I'd never seen, hit me harder than any fever had in the hospital. "Understand what I whispered?" "That you sold it." The woman appeared beside him, arms folded, her hair lacquered into a hard shell. "Paperwork's all signed. We paid Damon and Marissa fair and square. Title's already transferring. You really shouldn't be here." My cane trembled in my hand. "That's impossible. I never signed anything. This is my home." The woman shrugged, a small, cruel smile on her lips. "Not anymore. Marissa said you'd be staying somewhere else." For a moment, I thought my balance would give way. I steadied myself on the railing, my mind scrambling back through the last weeks, the folder of hospital forms shoved toward me while nurses hurried about Marissa's hand, pressing mine to sign here, initial there. My trust weaponized. "You must be mistaken." I tried again, though my voice faltered. "I only gave her permission for medical matters. Nothing else." Reuben's eyes flicked over me from the cane to the sagging skin beneath my eyes, and I saw it, dismissal. "Look, lady, we've moved our things in. You've been gone a month. It's over. Find somewhere else to go." Behind him, the sound of laughter floated from the living room. Children's voices, unfamiliar and shrill. A small girl darted past with one of my embroidered pillows in her arms. She didn't even glance at me. Heat flushed my face, a mix of humiliation and disbelief. This wasn't just betrayal, it was erasure swift and thorough, like I had been written out of my own story. "I need to speak to Marissa," I said firmly, drawing up what strength remained. "She's not here," the woman replied, and her tone made it clear she wouldn't be calling my daughter for me. "And even if she were, she told us this place isn't yours anymore. You're wasting your breath." The door began to close, but I wedged the tip of my cane against the frame. For a heartbeat, the three of us hung there, staring, me clinging to the last thread of dignity, them with the certainty of possession. Then the ache in my hip betrayed me, and I withdrew the cane. The door clicked shut, the sound final as a gavel. I stood in the driveway, the taxi long gone, the sun sliding toward evening. My hand gripped the worn handle of the cane, the only steady thing I had left. In the silence, the truth crystallized. Marissa had not only failed to protect me, she had orchestrated this. And with that clarity, I turned toward the road, knowing I would need to find a place to gather myself before deciding what came next. The wheels of my suitcase rattled unevenly along the cracked sidewalk as I walked away from the house. Each step throbbed through my recovering hip, but stopping wasn't an option. Behind me, laughter floated from the windows, foreign voices claiming the life I had built. I didn't look back. The nearest motel blinked its vacancy sign like a weary eye. I dragged myself across the parking lot, past cars coated in desert dust. Inside, the clerk barely looked up. My ID trembled slightly in his hand, but he handed back the key card without a word. Room 112. A thin slice of anonymity. The room smelled faintly of bleach and old smoke. A single lamp flickered its light, catching the scuffs on the dresser. I set my suitcase by the bed and sank down, slowly gripping the mattress edge as my hip protested. The silence pressed in louder than any hospital monitor. I thought of Anthony, how he used to polish the oak banister until it gleamed, how he'd sketch renovation plans at the kitchen table late into the night. He would measure, and then laugh when I teased him about his perfectionism. A home deserves care, he'd say the same as a family. And now the family was gone, and so was the home. The echo of his voice stung sharper than the betrayal itself. If he were still alive, would Marissa have dared, or had my solitude marked me as an easy mark? I pressed my palm against my eyes, but tears came anyway. When they subsided, I reached for my phone. The contact list blurred for a moment before I focused on one name, Ava Lung. We had met at 17 in college orientation, two girls too stubborn to be intimidated by anyone. She had become a formidable attorney, while I'd worked in bank compliance. Through marriages, funerals, and every disappointment she had remained. My last unshaken pillar. I pressed call. The line rang twice before her familiar clipped voice answered. "Helena, are you home yet?" The word home almost undid me. My throat caught, but I forced the truth out. I tried. The locks were changed. People I don't know are living there. They say Marissa sold the house. Silence stretched. Then Ava inhaled sharply. She did what I steadied my breath. They claim I signed papers. Power of attorney. I only remember hospital forms, nothing about the house. "Send me everything you signed," she said at once. Voice firm, professional. "Scan, photograph, anything. We'll sort through it. I don't even know where to begin." "You've already begun," she replied. "By telling me." Helena listened to me carefully. "We will fight this. But we need evidence, every scrap. Don't confront them alone again." Her confidence steadied the ground beneath me. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of her resolve wash over the hollow inside me. "I feel so foolish," I admitted. "Anthony always trusted me to protect what we built, and now it's all slipping away." "You are not foolish," Ava said gentler now. "They exploited your recovery. That's not your failure, it's theirs. And it's illegal." Her words pierced through the haze of shame. For the first time since the door closed on me, I felt a flicker of something other than despair. Not hope, not yet, but the faint outline of a plan. "All right," I whispered. "I'll gather everything I can." "Good. Rest tonight. Tomorrow we start. Together." When the call ended, I lowered the phone onto the nightstand. The room was still bare and lifeless, but Ava's promise echoed in the silence like a thread of light. I sat back against the pillows, exhaustion tugging at my body, but my mind alive with determination. The motel hum faded into night, and as I drifted into uneasy sleep, I knew this was only the first step toward reclaiming what was mine. By morning, the motel curtains bled pale sunlight into the room. I had barely slept, the night passing in fragments of restless thought. My suitcase sat open on the carpet clothes, spilling like a reminder of displacement. I forced myself upright, brewed bitter coffee from the dented machine, and pulled the folder of hospital paperwork from my bag. Ava arrived just before noon, a navy blazer draped over her arm hair, pulled into the same efficient knot she'd worn since law school. She carried her leather briefcase as if it were armor. Seeing her filled me with relief, though the weight of what I was about to show her pressed heavy in my chest. I spread the papers across the motel desk. Admission forms, consent. Waivers, insurance, acknowledgments, page after page of fine print blurred together. These are what I signed before surgery, I told her. I thought they were medical authorizations. She slipped on her reading glasses and began sorting with methodical precision. The room filled with the sound of paper, shuffling her pen, tapping against margins. I watched her brow crease. Here. She slid a document toward me. Durable power of attorney. The words swam as I leaned closer. My signature, shaky from pre-op nerves, sprawled at the bottom. The date matched the morning of my admission. But beneath the title, a section glared at me. Authority granted, medical and financial. My throat tightened. I never meant. I thought it was just for surgery decisions. Pain management emergencies. Nothing more. Ava tapped the line with her pen. Notice how the financial portion is buried on the second page in smaller font. Classic trick. And look, there's no witness signature, only a notary stamp I don't recognize. I racked my memory. That morning at the hospital had been a blur of nurses prepping IVs, anesthesia questions, Marissa at my elbow, urging me to sign quickly. My hands had trembled so badly she held the clipboard steady. I hadn't read past the first paragraph. I whispered almost to myself I trusted her. Ava's expression softened, but her voice stayed steady. They exploited that trust. This isn't just negligence, it's predatory. And given your recovery state, there's a case for undue influence. The words felt foreign, like they belonged in someone else's life. Yet there was my signature, the slant unmistakable, betraying me. My own hand had opened the gate. Ava began jotting notes, circling passages, marking page numbers. We'll need to compare this with property transfer records. If they use this POA to sign over your house, the deed changes will show up at the county recorder's office. I'll file for copies today. I sat back, dizzy. And if it's valid, her eyes met mine. Validity depends on context. No clear disclosure, no independent witness, and signed under medical duress. A judge could invalidate it. But we'll need more than suspicion, we need corroboration. I thought of the strangers in my living room, the little girl running with my pillow, the smirk on Reuben Clark's face. Rage pressed against the edges of my grief. I can't let them win, Ava. Anthony built that house with his bare hands. Every beam, every tile he saved for years, worked weekends because he wanted Marissa to inherit something solid. And now she's thrown it away to people who see it as nothing more than profit. Ava closed her briefcase with a decisive click. Then we don't let them. We start with these documents. Next, we trace the money. Paper leaves a trail, Helena, even when people think they've covered it. Her certainty steadied me. I gathered the pages back into the folder, my hand no longer shaking. The ledger of my absence had been written in signatures and stamps, but perhaps it could still be rewritten. When Ava left for the recorder's office, I remained at the desk, staring at the empty space where the papers had lain. My trust had been stolen with ink, but a plan was beginning to take shape, and it would lead me back to the roses at my door. That night, the motel's hum was broken only by the rattle of the air conditioner and the rustle of papers as I shuffled them again and again. My eyes burned, but I couldn't stop replaying the moment the door shut in my face. Somewhere in that house were pieces of my life. Anthony's ledger, my mother's recipe cards, the rose-patterned quilt I had stitched during Marissa's first pregnancy. I closed my eyes, trying to picture them safe, when another image surfaced, the small camera mounted above the garden arch. It had been Anthony's idea back when neighborhood kids cut through our yard at night. A weatherproof box with a cloud subscription, more peace of mind than anything else. I had forgotten about it, but the thought now bloomed with urgency. If it was still running, it might have captured something the day I was gone. The next morning, I told Ava as soon as she arrived. She raised an eyebrow, then her expression sharpened. If that camera's account is still active, Helena, you may have just given us gold. Her fingers flew across her laptop as I dug up the old login scribbled in my address book. By some miracle, the subscription had auto-renewed. Ava exhaled relief, mixing with anticipation. A few keystrokes later, the screen filled with still frames of my garden. Roses, drooping from neglect sunlight, shifting across familiar bricks, shadows moving across the porch. My breath caught. Ava queued up the video from 3 weeks ago, the day after my surgery. The feed wavered into motion, Damon's parents, stepping out of a van, their arms loaded with boxes. They moved briskly, confident as if they belonged. Damon appeared next, striding across my lawn, barking orders I couldn't hear. His father held up a set of keys, my keys, and twisted them in his hand with satisfaction. Unbelievable, Ava muttered, jotting a timestamp. We scrubbed forward. Days collapsed into seconds, men unloading furniture, contractors, carrying tools. My porch stripped of the wicker chairs Anthony and I had restored. At one point, Damon leaned against the railing, gesturing expansively to his father, mimicking blueprints with his hands. Renovations, as if the house were a blank canvas, not a memory-filled home. I pressed a hand to my mouth. Each careless motion felt like erasure. Here, Ava said, suddenly, slowing the feed. That's Marissa. My daughter stepped into view, her hair pulled back, shoulders hunched. Damon followed a folder under his arm. He thrust papers at her, pointing sharply. She shook her head, clutching her arms around herself, but he jabbed the page with his finger. His mother stood close, lips moving in what looked like persuasion or perhaps warning. Then, Marissa's face crumpled. She pressed the heel of her hand to her eyes, then signed. Damon snatched the papers back, satisfied. Marissa lingered for a moment, trembling before retreating into the house. The sight hollowed me. Betrayal I had expected, but not like this. Those weren't the actions of a woman in control. They were the actions of someone cornered. Ava zoomed in on the frame, freezing Marissa mid-tear. This changes things, she said quietly. If she was coerced, the legal implications shift. Exploitation duress judges take that seriously. I wanted to be furious, but grief outweighed rage. My daughter's handwriting on those papers had locked me out of my own life, yet the camera revealed another truth. Damon's hand gripping the pen behind hers. The roses in the background swayed with the breeze petals falling one by one, silent witnesses to the theft. Anthony had planted them decades ago, promising they would last longer than we would. Now they had seen our daughter break apart under the weight of a man's ambition. I sat back exhausted as Ava compiled clips and copied files onto a drive. We have evidence now, she said, her tone clipped but fierce. They can't hide behind forged papers or false smiles. We'll use their own arrogance against them. I knotted my throat tight. The roses had watched in silence, but I would not. The next move would be mine, and it would carry the weight of every petal they had trampled. By the time Ava returned with her laptop bag and a stack of printouts from the recorder's office, my motel room no longer looked like a place to rest. It had become a command center. Papers lay scattered across the desk. Receipts spilled from an envelope, and my folder of hospital documents sat at the center, like a wound waiting to be stitched. Ava cleared a space, then laid down the property records. As suspected, she said, tapping the lines with a manicured nail, the deed transfer lists Damon Clark as acting agent under power of attorney. Filed 2 weeks into your hospitalization. My signature, replicated, distorted, stared back at me from the page. I looked away, ashamed of its betrayal. That's just the surface. Ava continued, flipping open her laptop. I pulled bank statements while you were resting. There's a pattern here. Rows of numbers glowed on the screen. I leaned closer, the old training from my compliance years stirring awake. I didn't need her to explain. Wire transfers, each neat as a pin, marched down the column, $20,000 here, $15,000 there. The destinations were companies I had never heard of. Sterling Horizon LLC, Pondera Capital Group, Vantage Realty Partners. They're shells, Ava confirmed, registered under different names but all tied back to Damon's parents. Classic laundering structure. The figures blurred as I imagined my savings. 40 years of work over time, shifts, careful budgeting, dissolving into paper fronts. Anthony and I had skipped vacations, driven the same car until it rattled all to ensure a safety net. And now, strangers were catching their profits in that net, while I stood outside with nothing. Ava pulled another file from her bag. It gets worse. Inside were appraisal slips stamped and dated with photographs clipped to the corner. I knew them instantly. My mother's jade brooch, the sapphire ring Anthony gave me on our 20th anniversary, the gold chain I wore on our wedding day. Their value was itemized in cold ink notes scribbled about liquidation potential. I gripped the edge of the desk to steady myself. Pawned, not yet, Ava said. Appraised for collateral. Likely pledged against one of those shell loans. I pictured Damon's mother fastening my sapphire ring onto her finger, weighing it as if it were hers by right. The thought hollowed me, then hardened into something sharper. Ava placed a hand on mine. I know it feels unbearable. But Helena, this is evidence. Every transfer, every appraisal, they've left a trail. We can build a case strong enough to break them. I looked at her, at the fierce certainty in her eyes, and realized she was right. These weren't just losses. They were proof. Proof that Damon and his family had underestimated me, that they believed my age and my surgery had stripped me of vigilance. Anthony's voice echoed in memory. A home deserves care the same as a family. Care meant fighting even now. Especially now. I straightened, pushing back the tears that threatened. My cane leaned against the wall within reach, but I didn't grasp it. My spine held on its own. They think they've erased me, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I will not be erased, not from my house, not from my daughter's memory, not from the life Anthony built with his hands. Ava nodded, almost smiling. Then we move forward, step by step. Tomorrow I'll petition for an injunction. Tonight, we catalog everything. The desk filled with our work time stamps from the garden camera, flagged transactions appraisals marked with red ink. A war council conducted under the dim motel lamp. When at last we paused, my head heavy but my resolve clear. I knew this was only the beginning. The paper trail we followed tonight would lead us straight back to the people who thought I was powerless. And soon I would face them, not as a frail woman with a cane, but as someone carrying every proof of their theft in my hands. The next morning, I dialed Marissa. My hand trembled slightly, but not from weakness, only from the weight of what I needed to say. She answered, after several rings, her voice tired, almost guarded. Marissa, I said, steadying myself. We need to talk, just the two of us. No Damon, no parents. Meet me at the cafe on 7th by the library, 1 o'clock. A pause stretched on the line. All right, she murmured so quietly I nearly missed it. I arrived early, cane tapping against the tiled floor as I claimed a small corner booth. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air, a comfort I hadn't realized I missed. I wanted to believe she would come alone, that some piece of the girl who once ran barefoot through our garden still lived inside her. But when the door chimed, it was not just Marissa who entered. Damon strode in, first sharp suit, despite the heat, his smile slick as oil. Behind him came his parents. Claudia, in pearls raiment, with the air of a man surveying land he already owned. Marissa trailed, last eyes downcast. My heart sank. I asked for you alone, I said, my voice flat. Damon slid into the booth across from me as if it were his rightful throne. And she asked us, he said smoothly. We're family now. No secrets. Claudia settled beside him, glancing at my cane with thinly veiled disdain. You really should let go, Helena. It's unbecoming at your age. I folded my hands in my lap, keeping them still. This is between a mother and her daughter. Raymond leaned back, his smirk deliberate. Your daughter made her choice. And legally, it's airtight. Power of attorney notarized transfers, everything's in order. The law is on our side. Inside rage threatened to spill, but I forced my face into calm neutrality. Quietly, I slid my phone from my purse, thumb brushing the record button beneath the table. You speak of law, I said slowly, but law is not always justice. Damon laughed, a short cutting sound. Justice. You're lucky we haven't put you in a retirement facility. This house was too much for you. Now it's put to better use. Claudia leaned in, her perfume sharp and cloying. We've already contacted contractors. The kitchen will be gutted, walls knocked down. It'll be unrecognizable in a month. My stomach clenched, but I kept my gaze steady. That house was built by Anthony's hands. You speak as though memory is drywall. Raymond waved a dismissive hand. Memories don't pay property tax. Profit does. And your daughter understands that. I turned to Marissa then. She sat silent, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse. Is that true? I asked her softly. Do you believe this is profit? She lifted her eyes for a heartbeat, and in them I saw conflict, shame flickering beneath Damon's shadow. But she said nothing. Damon filled the silence. She knows what's best for her family, for us, and frankly, Helena. Your objections mean nothing. You signed. You handed it all to us. That's the beauty of paper. It doesn't care about your feelings. Every word, every sneer was captured on the device hidden in my hand. Their arrogance was their own undoing, and I let them talk, each boast another thread in the rope tightening around them. At last, I stood cane steady against the floor. Enjoy your coffee, I said calmly. I've heard enough. Claudia's smile was triumphant. That's the smartest thing you've said yet. But as I walked out into the sunlit street, the recording still running in my purse, it was not their triumph I carried, it was evidence. Their voices would condemn them more powerfully than my anger ever could. And I already knew the next step would take me back into the neighborhood where other eyes had been watching all along. I returned to the neighborhood with Ava at my side. Our steps measured as we walked past lawns I had once trimmed in rhythm with Anthony. Curtains shifted as we passed a ripple of curiosity. News had already traveled that I was back, though not in the way I wished. Mrs. Donnelly from across the street was the first to emerge, her apron still dusted with flour. She hurried down her porch steps and clutched my arm as though I might vanish again. Helena, I'm so sorry, she whispered. We didn't know what to do. They moved in so fast. Her words tumbled out deliveries at odd hours, trucks unloading, furniture men in suits surveying the property. She pressed a folded receipt into my hand, dated just days after my surgery, for high-end appliances delivered in Damon's name. Soon, others gathered. The Ramirez family showed me photos their teenage son had snapped on his phone, images of Damon striding across my yard with blueprints, Claudia directing workers like she was staging a play. Each picture was another nail in the coffin of their lies. A contractor named Jensen approached us near the mailbox cluster. He rubbed the back of his neck uneasy. Look, I probably shouldn't say this, but I was hired for preliminary estimates. They wanted the place gutted, walls down, everything modernized, fast-tracked permits. Damon said his mother-in-law signed off. Something about needing it all done before the end of summer. His words pierced me. My home wasn't even a home to them, just a project on a deadline. Anthony's careful restorations, the oak beams he polished with pride, they planned to erase it all like chalk from a board. Ava scribbled notes while I tried to steady my breath. Would you be willing to put that in writing? She asked Jensen. He hesitated, then nodded slowly. If it helps set things right. As the crowd thinned, one last voice caught me off guard. A nurse I recognized from my ward at the hospital. Emily Chen stepped from her car. She approached cautiously, glancing around before speaking. "Mrs. Tran, I shouldn't get involved, but I need you to know something." Her voice was low, urgent. "Your post-op infection, it didn't match the usual pattern." The attending physician was puzzled. "And I saw Marissa arguing with one of the staff over your charts. It didn't sit right with me. My knees weakened, and I gripped my cane harder." "Are you saying I don't know for certain?" She interrupted, eyes wide. But it looked deliberate, like someone wanted your stay prolonged. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." The street blurred for a moment. My daughter at my bedside, pressing papers into my hands while I drifted in and out of fever. Her voice urging me to sign, assuring me it was just routine. Could it be possible that the delay in my healing hadn't been misfortune, but manipulation? Ava placed a hand on my shoulder, anchoring me. "Thank you, Emily. That's important. If you're willing to make a statement, it could be critical." Emily nodded, though fear flickered across her face. "I'll think about it." I just couldn't stay silent anymore. When she left, the air felt heavier, as though the whole neighborhood carried pieces of the puzzle I hadn't dared to imagine. Receipts, photos, contractor notes, whispers of medical tampering, all threads in a net Ava was already weaving. Back at the motel, we spread everything across the desk once more. Ava's pen scratched furiously as she organized the evidence into neat piles. Financial exploitation, property fraud, possible medical abuse. Her jaw was tight, her eyes sharp. "This isn't just betrayal," she said almost to herself. "It's elder exploitation, layered and deliberate. They've built their scheme on your trust, your illness, even your absence. But they've also left a trail, and we're going to follow it." I nodded, my hand resting on the pile of photographs. My neighbors had been silent witnesses, but now their voices joined mine. The rope was tightening, strand by strand, and soon I would use it to pull myself back through the very door they had slammed in my face. That night, I sat on the motel bed with the neighbors' photos scattered like confetti of stolen time. My eyes lingered on one image of Damon waving his arms, miming walls being torn down. The thought of strangers mapping out renovations in my living room made my chest ache. And then a memory came back, one I hadn't thought of in years. The side door by the kitchen, half hidden by ivy, the door Marissa used as a teenager when she thought she was clever enough to sneak past curfew. I had never told her I knew. I would hear the latch click and her soft footsteps across the tile. I always left that door unlocked for her, a small mercy of motherhood. The thought burned in me. If it had stayed our secret all these years, maybe it was still mine to use. The following afternoon, while Ava prepared injunction drafts at her office, I went back. The street was quiet, cicadas thrumming in the heat. Damon's car sat in the driveway, sleek and black, a statement of ownership that wasn't his to claim. I skirted the hedges, my cane sinking slightly into the dry earth until I reached the ivy-covered door. My hand shook as I pressed the old latch. To my shock, it gave way easily, creaking faintly, as though time itself remembered me. The air inside smelled foreign new paint, overlaying the familiar lavender sachets I had once tucked in drawers. I slipped in, every nerve on edge. Voices drifted from the study. Damon's voice, confident and smug, carried into the hallway. I edged closer, heart pounding. "Another 2 properties closed last week," he was saying, his words echoing in the rhythm of a speakerphone. Funds routed from Helena's accounts kept it seamless. Nobody questions transfers from a retiree with clean banking history. My stomach turned. He wasn't just stealing my home, he was using my reputation, my careful decades of honest work to cloak his fraud. A tinny voice crackled from the phone. "Risky. Won't the bank notice?" Damon laughed. "Please." She was in the hospital, doped up. We had full power of attorney. Besides, she trusts me. always has. We've got weeks before she even realizes what's missing. I pressed record on my phone, the screen glowing faintly in the shadows. My hands trembled, but I held steady, capturing every word. He continued bragging, painting the map of their scheme. Once we've got the block, rezoning doubles the value. Sterling Properties looks like a hero bringing development. And Helena, he chuckled cruelly, she'll be tucked away somewhere knitting. By the time she figures it out, it'll be too late. A silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the line. Then Damon spoke again, lower, as if savoring his own cleverness. The best part, using her accounts keeps us squeaky clean. Who's going to question the grieving widow with a perfect record? She's the camouflage. I clutched the cane so hard my knuckles whitened. Grieving widow. Yes, Anthony was gone, but Damon had no right to turn my grief into his alibi. The conversation ended abruptly. The beep of a call terminated. I slipped back through the side door, the recording still running, my breath ragged but victorious. The late sun bathed the ivy in gold as I closed the latch behind me. Back at the motel, I sent the file to Ava with shaking fingers. My message was simple: I have him. On his own words. When she called minutes later, her voice carried a fierce edge I had never heard before. Helena, this is the break we needed. You've just handed us proof of wire fraud and identity misuse. This could bring the entire operation down. For the first time since the hospital, I felt the weight shift. No longer crushed beneath betrayal, I was holding a weapon forged from Damon's own arrogance. And with it, Ava and I could begin to set the trap. The morning after I captured Damon's bragging, Ava met me at the motel with an intensity that filled the small room. She carried not only her briefcase, but two new faces: Assistant District Attorney Carla Vega and Investigator Mark Rains from the Elder Abuse Unit. Their presence made everything suddenly heavier, more real. Carla laid out a thin folder. We've reviewed the recording you provided. It's strong. But to secure indictments on financial exploitation and fraud, we need a live act, an attempt we can monitor directly. That's where you come in. I leaned forward, my palms pressed against my knees. You're asking me to let him steal again. Not steal, Ava interjected. Attempt. We'll control it. A monitored account in your name, seeded with funds the state has arranged. Damon believes he still has access through the power of attorney. If he initiates a transfer, we'll capture it in real time. Mark added, every keystroke, every authorization will be logged. It will be undeniable. Fear stirred low in my stomach. My savings had already been bled. The thought of watching another account vanish, even if staged, tightened my chest. Yet beneath the fear flickered something sharper. Exhilaration. The hunter who believed me weak would walk into his own snare blind. I want to be there, I said. Ava shook her head at once. Helena, you don't need to expose yourself. I do. I countered, my voice steady. This isn't just evidence, it's my life. He took my home, my reputation, my peace. If you want him to reveal himself, he needs to believe I'm still the same woman he can bully. I'll give him that, but on my terms. Carla studied me for a long moment before nodding. We can manage that. But safety first. You'll be in a controlled environment, our office monitored phones. If he tries to push further, we cut the line. The plan unspooled across the table in neat steps. A letter drafted to Damon requesting help moving funds for my care. A bait account dressed with just enough balance to tempt him. My role would be simple. A phone call, my voice weary but trusting a script Ava and Carla prepared. Every word designed to feed Damon's arrogance. That night I sat alone rehearsing the lines. The motel's shadows pressed close as I repeated them softer each time until they no longer felt like betrayal, but strategy. My cane leaned beside the chair, reminder of my fragility. Yet in that moment, I felt more alive than I had in months. Anthony's memory surfaced, his laugh when we played cards. Sometimes you win, not by holding, but by baiting the bluff. He would have understood. When dawn came, I dressed carefully. Choosing a blouse Anthony had always said brought out the steel in my eyes. At the DA's office, wires ran from the phone to Mark's laptop screens, glowing with watchful lines of code. Carla gave me a final nod. "You're ready," Ava asked, her hand warm over mine. "I've been ready since the day they shut my door," I replied. The room hushed as I lifted the receiver. Damon answered on the second ring, his voice smooth, practiced. I let mine tremble just enough. "Damon, I need help. There's an account with funds for my care. I can't manage it on my own. Can you transfer it like before hook swallowed bait?" I heard the eagerness slip into his tone as he agreed, asking for the details. Mark's fingers flew across the keyboard, capturing everything. And as Damon walked himself into the trap, I felt fear and triumph weave together in my chest, binding me tighter to the battle still ahead. The sun was barely over the rooftops when the knock came. Sharp, deliberate, no hesitation. From the motel window, I saw them lined up in formation, process servers with folders under arm, 2 uniformed officers, and a locksmith hefting a toolbox. Dawn had never looked so precise. Ava met me in the parking lot, her blazer uncreased despite the early hour. "Today," she said simply, "we walked together to my house." My house. The place that had rejected me weeks before. Damon's black car was still in the driveway, a symbol of arrogance parked on Anthony's bricks. The officers approached first, knocking loud enough to wake the entire street. After a pause, the door opened. Damon appeared in his robe, smirk already forming. "What's this circus?" Carla Vega stepped forward, her voice clear as a bell. "Mr. Clark, by order of the court, you are served. Temporary restraining order. All property transfers and financial transactions are frozen pending review." She handed him the envelope. "You and your family are to vacate these premises until further ruling." Damon scoffed, tearing the envelope open. "This is nonsense. The deed is signed, the transfer's done. Helena has no authority anymore. That's where you're mistaken." Ava cut in her tone, smooth as glass. She held up a copy of the trust deed Anthony had filed years ago. The property is held in a family trust. All transfers require multiple trustee signatures. One is Helena. The other, she tapped her own name typed neatly on the page, is mine. You never had consent. Every document you waived is invalid. For the first time, Damon's smile faltered. He glanced behind him, searching for Claudia and Raymond, like a drowning man searching for a rope. Marissa stepped into the doorway, her hair mussed, her expression pale. She looked at me as though seeing me clearly for the first time in months. "You knew," she whispered to Damon. His jaw tightened. "It doesn't matter. It's all technicalities. We'll fight it." Ava tilted her head. "Fight with what funds?" "All accounts tied to Helena have been frozen. The wire you attempted yesterday was intercepted and logged. We have you on record describing your entire scheme." Damon's face drained of color. For once, no words came. The locksmith pushed past, gently murmuring an apology to me as he set to work on the locks. The sound of his drill was like music, each whir another chain broken. Neighbors gathered on lawns, whispering, cameras in hand. The same people who had watched helplessly as Damon claimed ownership now stood witness to his unraveling. Claudia appeared at the top of the stairs, pearls already around her neck, fury etched into every line of her face. "This is harassment," she spat. "We've invested thousands already." "You can't just," Carla's voice cut her off. "Ma'am, you are not the owner of this residence. Any alterations made will be reviewed as damages in civil proceedings. For now, you have 20 minutes to collect essentials and leave." Raymond muttered curses under his breath. but obeyed, dragging suitcases down the stairs. His arrogance sagged under the weight of official orders. Through it all, Marissa stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes locked on me, flickering with shame, and something else, maybe the recognition of a wall she could no longer pretend wasn't there. When the last suitcase thudded into the driveway, the locksmith turned and pressed new keys into my palm. Cold metal, warm triumph. My hand shook as I closed my fingers around them. I looked at Damon one final time. His robe hung limp. His swagger collapsed, his future unraveling at the edges. For the first time, he looked smaller than the doorway he had once barred me from. The officers stepped forward to escort them away, and I crossed the threshold at last. The air inside was stale, but it was mine. And as I stepped back into my home, I knew this battle was not over. It was only shifting to a higher ground. 2 days after the house was restored to me, Ava called with a quiet urgency. "They've scheduled Marissa's deposition. You don't have to attend, but I'll be there," I said. Before she finished, the conference room in the DA's office was cold, the kind of cold meant to strip away comfort and leave only truth. Marissa sat at the long table, shoulders hunched, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. A court reporter poised her fingers above the keys. Across from her, Carla Vega leaned forward, voice calm but relentless. "Mrs. Clark, can you explain how your husband obtained access to your mother's accounts?" Marissa flinched at the word husband. She twisted a tissue in her hands until it frayed. He told me it was temporary, that it would help us catch up on debts." Her voice cracked. I didn't know how deep it would go. Carla slid a document across the table. "This is your signature on the property transfer, correct?" Marissa nodded, barely audible. "Did you sign willingly?" Silence filled the room until finally she whispered, "No." My chest tightened. Ava's hand brushed mine under the table, steadying me. Carla pressed her tone sharper. "Why did you sign?" Marissa's fingers stilled. She lifted her eyes, and for the first time since this began, she looked directly at me. "Because Damon promised he could fix everything. The credit cards, the loan I took out against the condo, the tuition payments. He said once the rezoning deal came through, we'd be rich. We'd pay it all back. We'd give you more than you ever had." I wanted to believe her, to gather her like I had when she scraped her knees as a child, but the memory of the door slamming shut still throbbed fresh. Carla's voice softened slightly. "Mrs. Clark, did Damon pressure you in other ways?" Marissa's face crumpled. She pulled another tissue, her voice trembling. "He knew about something from years ago. College. I worked in the student union office. Her breath hitched. "I skimmed money from a fundraiser. Stupid small, but they never caught me. Damon found out. He said if I didn't help, he'd expose it. Said no one would believe me over him, not even you, Mom." The words landed like stones. I sat frozen, my mind shattering between the daughter I raised and the stranger beside me. Betrayer. Victim. Both. Carla asked the next question, but I barely heard it. My thoughts spiraled back to Marissa at 19, laughing with her friends, promising me she'd make something of herself. And now this, an old sin. Damon had sharpened into a blade, one he pressed against her throat until she turned it toward me. Marissa buried her face in her hands. I was scared. I thought if I played along, he'd let it go. "I never wanted you to lose the house, Mom. I swear." Her words broke me more than Damon's arrogance ever could. He was a predator. She was my child. And yet it was her voice that told me I had no place in the home Anthony and I built. Carla closed the file. "That's enough for today." The court reporter's keys stilled. Chairs scraped back. Ava touched my arm gently, but I couldn't move. My eyes stayed fixed on Marissa, who sat trembling, her face streaked with tears. When she finally looked up again, her lips parted, as if to speak to me. but no sound came. She seemed caught between apology and despair, too heavy to choose either. I stood slowly leaning on my cane. My heart was torn in two, half fury, half sorrow. The daughter I loved was both the knife and the wound. And as I walked out of the room, I knew the hardest decision still lay ahead, whether to see her as an enemy to cut away or as a broken branch that might still be bound back to the tree. The letter from the hospital arrived in a plain envelope, almost invisible in its ordinariness. I slid it open, expecting another bill or some dull explanation about my extended stay. Instead, my eyes caught on the words internal review and irregularities in medication administration. I read the page twice, the words refusing to settle. A nurse, Emily Chen, the same woman who had pulled me aside outside the house, had filed a formal statement. My post-op antibiotics had been tampered with, dosages changed, orders falsified. The review committee suspected deliberate interference. The room tilted. I gripped the counter to steady myself, but the nausea rose anyway. I had thought my prolonged fever, the weakness that dragged on for weeks, was an unlucky complication. Now it appeared those fevers weren't accidents at all. Someone had wanted me week absent, unable to return home. Ava came as soon as I called. She read the letter, her mouth tightening into a line. "This is bigger than property fraud. We'll have to escalate. I'll contact federal authorities. This is elder abuse crossing into medical tampering." I shook my head slowly, trying to clear the fog of disbelief. "You mean attempted harm? Attempted murder?" Her eyes softened, but she didn't deny it. She placed a steadying hand on mine. "We'll get the FBI involved. They specialize in financial crimes, but when elder abuse escalates to physical danger, it falls under their jurisdiction too. We have to treat this seriously." By the next afternoon, 2 agents sat in my living room, their jackets marked with those 3 stark letters that made neighbors peek nervously from behind curtains. They listened carefully as Ava laid out the trail. The forged power of attorney, the wire transfers the footage of Damon, barking orders the deposition where Marissa admitted coercion. And finally, the hospital review pointing to falsified medical records. Agent Ricks, the older of the 2, leaned forward. "Mrs. Tran, this means your extended hospitalization may not have been natural. Whoever altered your medication effectively kept you sidelined so your assets could be stripped." Hearing it spoken aloud shattered the fragile wall I'd built around my understanding. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold. Not fate, design. I had lain in that hospital bed, sweating through sheets, whispering prayers for recovery, while somewhere, someone calculated how much more time they had to bleed me dry. "I trusted my daughter to sit at my bedside," I said hoarsely, "and all the while she let them." I couldn't finish. The bile rose too quickly. Agent Ricks's partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Callahan, spoke firmly. "We'll be opening a case for attempted harm alongside elder exploitation. If evidence connects Damon or his in-laws to the nurse, it moves into criminal conspiracy territory. We'll need your full cooperation." I nodded, though my body felt leaden. Cooperation was all I had left. After they left, I sat in the silence of my home, the weight pressing down. Every corner seemed tainted. Now the kitchen where Anthony once made tea, the study where Damon had bragged into a phone, the bedroom where I recovered from surgery. Still aching with fever, shadows everywhere. But then Ava placed the keys to the filing cabinet back in my hand. "Helena," she said gently, "you've survived their worst already. Now we bring everything into the light." Her words anchored me. My body still shook, but somewhere deeper, a spark caught. If they wanted me sick, hidden, silenced, then my very breath was defiance. I straightened, slowly leaning on my cane, and whispered to myself, "They chose poison. I choose fire." And with that, I resolved to torch every corner of their lies until nothing but truth remained. The courthouse smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a scent that carried both dignity and dread. I sat in the gallery beside Ava, my cane resting against the bench, watching the storm unfold in human form. The prosecutor's voice was firm as she read the charges: financial exploitation, forgery, conspiracy, and now, because of the hospital revelations, attempted harm. Each word struck like a hammer. The defendants sat at the long table, three against the weight of the law. Claudia and Raymond wore sneers as though they were jewelry, dismissive glances passing between them. Their tailored suits gleamed, their posture unbent, as if sheer arrogance could form a shield. I could almost hear Claudia's earlier words echoing, "Profit pays taxes, not memories." She still believed money would buy her freedom. Damon, by contrast, looked nothing like the man who once blocked me from my own home. His suit sagged, his eyes bloodshot. When the prosecutor detailed the intercepted transfer, his hands trembled visibly. "Mr. Clark," the judge intoned, "are you prepared to enter a plea?" A hush swept through the room. Damon's lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically, but Damon shook his head, voice cracking as he spoke. "Guilty, Your Honor. I'll take the deal." A ripple of murmurs rolled through the gallery. I watched as his parents stiffened in outrage, their son's collapse, shattering their illusion of control. Raymond's lips pulled back in disgust. Claudia whispered something sharp enough to slice. But Damon just lowered his head, shoulders caving inward like a man already halfway behind bars. The judge confirmed the plea, noting the reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. The gavel struck final and sharp. Damon slumped, the sound reverberating like a verdict, not only on his crimes, but on the hollow life he had chosen. Then came the moment I had dreaded and expected. Marissa was called. She walked to the stand with her head bowed, her hands clutched together as though in prayer. Her voice wavered through the oath, each word coated with shame. The prosecutor guided her gently, but every answer she gave still cut. Yes, she had signed documents under pressure. Yes, she had been complicit in concealing transfers. Yes, she had remained silent while Damon used my accounts. Each admission tightened the band around my chest. Then, during a pause, she turned her head slightly toward me. Her lips moved barely a whisper. "I never meant it to go this far." The words pierced more deeply than any gavel could. They weren't an excuse, not fully. They were a plea for me to remember the girl she once was, the daughter who baked cookies with Anthony in the kitchen, who once carried roses from the garden to my bedside when I had the flu. But I couldn't forget the woman who stood by as I was locked out of my own home. The betrayal and the tears lived side by side, both true, both unbearable. When the session adjourned, the defendants escorted out, and the gallery began to empty. I stayed seated, my cane pressed into the floor like an anchor. Justice had spoken in its measured way, indictments, pleas, sentences to come, but the real storm still raged inside me. Ava touched my shoulder gently. "It's a victory, Helena. You've won." I nodded, though my heart knew the battle wasn't over. Winning in court was one thing. Facing the fractured remains of my family was another. As I rose to leave the courtroom, Marissa's whisper echoed again, circling me like thunder that refused to fade. And I knew the next step would demand more strength than any testimony deciding what kind of mother I would be to a daughter broken by both guilt and deceit. The bailiff had barely closed the courtroom doors behind us when Ava pressed the new keys into my palm. "It's yours again," she said softly. Back at the house, I stood for a long moment on the porch, the brass cool against my skin. The last time I held keys here, I was shut out. Now the weight felt different, steadier though still tinged with grief. I turned the lock and the door opened with a hollow sigh. Inside, the air was familiar, but off-kilter, like a melody played half a note too sharp. The curtains in the living room were wrong, synthetic garish where Anthony and I had chosen soft linen. Their presence felt like an insult whispered into the walls. I moved slowly through each room cane, tapping against the hardwood. The jewelry box in the bedroom was empty, the small indents in the velvet tray aching louder than words. My emerald pendant, the silver cufflinks Anthony wore to our anniversary dinners, gone. The FBI had promised most items would be recovered, but the absence still gouged me. In the study, I stopped short. Anthony's antique desk, his pride, his anchor, had been rotated to face the doorway instead of the garden window. A simple turn, yet it gutted me. He had always sat, watching the roses, saying the blooms reminded him to look forward, not back. Now the desk stared at me like a stranger stripped of his intention. I gripped the edge and whispered, "Not theirs to change." With effort, I pushed it back inch by inch until it faced the window again. The sunlight struck its surface, and suddenly the room breathed differently, as if grateful. That was when I noticed the drawer. I pulled it open and found tucked beneath a stack of old envelopes Anthony's leather-bound ledger. I hadn't seen it in years. His neat handwriting filled the pages, meticulous notes on home repairs budgets, even the costs of roses he planted each spring. He had recorded everything, not for money, but for memory. I traced the ink with my fingertip, tears slipping free before I could stop them. Amid all the violations, this book had survived, untouched. It was as if Anthony himself had guarded it, leaving me a reminder that continuity still lived here, even if marred. I sat in his chair, the ledger open on my lap, and finally let myself cry. Not the sharp, angry tears I'd held in the motel, nor the bitter ones shed in court. These were quieter cleansing. The house seemed to settle around me, its bones remembering who I was. When the sobs passed, I inhaled deeply. The scent of lavender sachets lingered faintly in the closets, defiant against months of intrusion. The walls, though painted over, still held echoes of laughter, of Anthony's music, of Marissa's childhood footsteps. They hadn't stolen everything. They couldn't. I closed the ledger gently and set it on the desk, where Anthony had always left it, facing the garden. Outside, the roses needed pruning, but their stubborn blooms lifted in the breeze. For the first time since the hospital, I felt air fill my lungs without weight. The house was scarred, yes, so was I. But both could be restored. First the walls, then the soul that tied them together. I locked the door again, the keys firm in my grasp. This time they were not just metal, but promise. And as I stood in the quiet, I knew the next step would not be within these walls, but in facing the future of a daughter who hovered between guilt and ruin. It began quietly, the way most healing does not, with grand speeches, but with a knock on the door and a casserole dish warm in my hands. Mrs. Donnelly was the first, her flour-dusted smile trembling as she said, "We should have done more." Soon, others followed. The Ramirezes with fresh tamales, Eleanor Jameson with jars of preserves, even Jensen the contractor, bringing tools to mend a gate Damon had left broken. Each gesture was a thread weaving me back into a community I hadn't realized I'd almost lost. With Ava's encouragement, I began hosting small gatherings in the library's meeting hall. We spoke not of betrayal, but of protection. How easily power of attorney could be twisted, how trust documents could shield rather than expose. I laid out my story piece by piece, not for pity, but for warning. Faces leaned in, taking notes, nodding with the kind of urgency born of recognition. Elder scams had already taken neighbors I knew, quiet Mr. Henderson, the Miller family, 2 doors down. Now, with the FBI digging deeper, their names surfaced in depositions. My pain was part of something larger, and that made the telling bearable. If my scars became a map for others, perhaps Anthony's ledger would not be the only continuity preserved. After one workshop, a woman pressed my hands in hers. You've turned your fight into something bigger. That's strength. I didn't feel strong most days. But I remembered Anthony's voice plant again, Helena. Even if the frost comes, plant again. And so I did. I returned to the garden. Kneeling in the dirt was painful for my hip, but I learned to balance with the cane to move slower, more deliberate. Each rose bush pruned, each hydrangea watered, was a piece of therapy no courtroom could offer. My gloves came away damp, my nails lined with soil, and yet my breath steadied my shoulders, loosened. The roses had suffered neglect, but buds still pushed through, resilient, refusing to surrender to weeds. I saw myself in them, cut back, but blooming again. Neighbors wandered by as I worked, offering advice, sometimes laughter, sometimes silence. What mattered wasn't the words, but the presence. For months I had been surrounded by vultures. Now I was ringed by roots of a different kind. Friendship, solidarity, protection. One evening, as twilight fell and the air smelled of earth and cut stems, I stood at the edge of the garden and looked at what was taking shape. Not perfection, not restoration of the past, but renewal. The kind that grows bolder in sunlight because it has known shadow. The betrayal would never vanish. The hospital fevers. The slammed door, Marissa's trembling confession, all of it was etched too deeply. But the soil held more than pain. It held possibility. And as the roses leaned toward the last light of day, I felt myself leaning with them. It was in that quiet moment that my phone rang, Ava's name glowing on the screen. Her voice carried a gravity that cut through the peace. Helena. She said they need your final statement regarding Marissa. It could decide her fate. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, their scent sharp, almost questioning, as I gripped the phone tighter. The visitation room was louder than I expected, plastic chairs scraping the floor, low voices murmuring between glass partitions. When they brought Marissa in, her eyes darted around nervously before they landed on me. She looked smaller than I remembered her orange uniform, hanging loose, her hair pulled back in a hurried bun. She sat across from me, fingers laced so tightly, her knuckles whitened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she whispered, "I was weak, Mom. I thought Damon would fix everything. I was afraid of losing him, of losing face. And when he threatened me," her voice broke, "I was ashamed. Still am." I studied her, the child I once sang to sleep, the woman who had turned me out of my own home. In her eyes, I saw both betrayal and something fragile, desperate to survive. "You let fear steer you," I said quietly, "and shame chained you. Both are choices, Marissa. Choices with consequences." Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know I never wanted to hurt you this deeply." I reached into my bag and slid an envelope across the table. "This was your father's," I said. "He wrote it before he passed, but I never gave it to you. I think now is the time." Her hands shook as she opened it. Anthony's neat script covered the page, urging her to live with integrity, to remember that shortcuts always cost more than they promise. She read silently, lips moving over each word. By the time she folded it again, her face was streaked with tears. "He believed in me," she whispered. "He did," I replied, "and so did I. But belief doesn't erase actions. I can't hand you forgiveness like a gift. What I can offer is a path, integrity, truth, responsibility. If you choose those, maybe one day we can meet again, not across this table, but as family." She nodded slowly, clutching the letter to her chest like a lifeline. "I'll try, Mom. I'll try to be someone he wouldn't be ashamed of." The guard announced the end of visitation. As she stood, Marissa met my eyes one last time. "Thank you for still seeing me." I didn't answer. Words felt too fragile. Instead, I let her carry her father's letter back with her. A bridge half built, waiting for her steps. When I walked out into the afternoon light cane steady against the pavement, I felt the weight of both loss and possibility pressing at once. The future with Marissa was uncertain, but for the first time, it wasn't closed. And as I reached my car, my phone buzzed with a call from Ava, her voice urgent. Helena, the FBI just uncovered more properties tied to the Clarks. We're not done yet. 6 months slipped by in ways I hadn't expected. Seasons changed, hearings concluded, and the roses in my garden, cut back almost to nothing, bloomed again with stubborn grace. Their petals stretched wide toward the sun, and I found myself kneeling among them, more often. Hands in soil, heart steadier than it had been in years. Anthony's foundation, once focused solely on medical research, now carried a new branch in his name: elder protection. We offered workshops, legal clinics, and a small emergency fund for those trapped in the same kind of nightmare I had endured. Standing at the podium at its launch, I felt something close to peace, purpose, woven from pain. Marissa remained in a correctional facility serving her sentence with the possibility of parole. Her letters arrived weekly, each one tentative, filled with apologies and stories of the classes she was taking, financial literacy, community service programs. I read them all, never replying quickly, but never throwing them away either. Forgiveness was no longer a word I tossed around lightly. It was a process as steady and difficult as tending roses. Life in the neighborhood pulsed with new strength. Neighbors gathered not just to gossip, but to protect one another, checking in on widows, helping with paperwork, sharing resources. The betrayal that had once isolated me now connected us, binding our streets together like roots under the earth. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, a moving truck pulled up across the street. A young woman stepped out, carrying a box that seemed too heavy for her slight frame. I walked over, cane tapping the pavement. She introduced herself as Lena Morales. Her smile was polite, but her eyes carried the shadow I knew too well. Over tea, she confessed in halting words that she had lost her condo in Dallas to a scheme involving shell companies and predatory loans. My heart clenched, the very pattern Damon's in-laws had spun. Their reach, it seemed, had scarred more lives than even the FBI uncovered. Everyone told me it was my fault, Lena whispered, that I should have known better. But I didn't. I just signed what they gave me. I reached across the table, taking her trembling hand in mine. You're not alone anymore. We fight these battles together now. The roses swayed outside the window, their blossoms heavy with evening dew. I realized the fight was not finished. It never truly would be. But the difference was clear. I was no longer standing alone at a locked door. That night, before turning in, I checked the new locks. One last time. The keys glinted on their hook by the kitchen door. I smiled, whispering the rule I had built my life around once more. I still keep a spare key. Respect, first entry, second. Outline. Helena Tran, 67, returns from a month in hospital after hip surgery. Twist strangers are inside the house. Damon's relatives claim they bought it from her daughter Marissa. Locks are changed. Helena is told she has no place here. Immediate sense of betrayal, plus confusion, amplified by her physical frailty, ends with her standing in the driveway, clutching her cane, realizing her daughter orchestrated this. Hook, question. If the door to your own home shut against you, would you knock again or plot another way in? Helena drags her small suitcase to a nearby motel, reflects on her late husband's careful building of the home, calls her lifelong friend, Ava Leung, now an elder law attorney. Ava promises, we'll fight this, but we need evidence. Hook, question. When trust is broken by blood, do you retreat or call in allies forged by choice? Ava examines documents. Helena's signature appears on a power of attorney. Helena recalls hastily signing papers. Pre-surgery. Shock, the papers include not just medical, but financial rights. Ava suspects forgery or exploitation. Hook, question. If your own hand betrayed you on paper, can you still rewrite the terms of your life? Helena remembers her garden camera that uploads to the cloud. Ava retrieves the feed. They see Damon and his parents moving things, discussing renovations as if they own the place. Twist footage shows Marissa weeping while Damon forces her to sign another set of documents. Hook. Question. If betrayal comes with tears, is it weakness or proof of deeper chains? Helena and Ava spread papers across a motel desk. Find financial drains, wire transfers to Shell LLCs tied to Damon's family. Discover Helena's heirloom jewelry appraised and pawned. Helena steels herself. I will not be erased. Hook. Question. When thieves strip your past, do you mourn the loss or sharpen the memory into a weapon? Helena asks Marissa to meet privately. Twist. Marissa arrives with Damon and his parents. The Clarks mock Helena, boast that the law is on our side. Helena secretly records their arrogance. Hook. Question. When family brings enemies to your table, do you shout or let their own voices condemn them? Neighbors share receipts. Photos. Gossip. One contractor reveals rushed plans for major remodels. Nurse hints. Helena's hospital stay may have been prolonged intentionally. Ava begins compiling a case for elder exploitation. Hook. Question. If whispers become evidence, do you treat them as rumor or as the rope that binds the guilty? Helena recalls a side entrance she once left open for Marissa as a teen sneaking home. She uses it now to slip back inside. Twist overhears Damon bragging on speakerphone about using Helena's accounts to buy more properties. She captures it all on her phone. Hook. Question. If the past left you a secret key, do you lock the door behind you or open it wide for justice? Ava works with DA's elder abuse unit. Plan. Let Damon attempt one more transfer, but into a monitored account. Helena insists on being part of the sting. She feels both fear and exhilaration. Hook. Question. When the bait is your life savings, do you clutch it tighter or dangle it to snare the thief? Process servers, police locksmith arrive in sync. TRO filed assets frozen. Damon's smugness collapses when Ava explains the trust deed requires multiple trustees, including Ava herself. Marissa's mask cracks. Hook. Question. If a legal wall rises where betrayal once walked free, do you lean on it or climb higher still? In deposition, Marissa confesses heavy debts. Damon's promises of wealth. Twist. She admits Damon threatened to expose her past college embezzlement unless she complied. Helena's heart breaks. Her daughter is victim and betrayer at once. Hook. Question. If the knife in your back is held by your child's trembling hand, do you pull it out or grasp it tighter? To understand why Hospital Review, a nurse, altered Helena's medication, possibly on Damon's orders. FBI joins case elder abuse, escalates to attempted harm. Helena feels physically ill at the revelation her hospital stay may have been engineered. Hook. Question. If illness wasn't fate, but design, do you fear the shadows or light a torch in every corner? Charges filed: exploitation, forgery, conspiracy. Damon's parents sneer. Confident money will shield them. Damon crumbles and accepts plea deal. Helena faces Marissa in court. Marissa whispers, I never meant it to go this far. Hook. Question. When justice demands testimony against blood, do you shield them or let truth strike like lightning? Helena walks through her reclaimed home. Notices subtle violations: missing jewelry, wrong curtains, desk turned. Finds her husband's old ledger untouched, a symbol of continuity. She cries, then breathes easier. Hook. Question. When a house returns to you, do you restore its walls first or the soul within? Community organizes against elder scams. Helena leads workshops on POA dangers. Neighbors bring meals. Friendship blossoms again. Helena tends roses. Finding therapy in soil. Hook. Question. When roots are cut, do you plant again in fear or grow bolder in the open sun? Prison visitation. Helena meets Marissa. Marissa admits. Weakness. Fear, shame. Helena gives her father's old letter urging integrity. She refuses to promise forgiveness, but offers a path to earn it. Hook. Question. If forgiveness is a bridge, do you step onto it half-built or wait for the other to finish it? 6 months later, roses bloom again. Helena expands her late husband's foundation to include elder protection. Twist epilogue. A new neighbor seeks her help, another victim of Damon's past schemes, proving the battle continues. Closing line. I still keep a spare key, respect first, entry second. Hook question final. When respect finally returns to your door, do you savor it alone or open it wide to the world?